Well, thank you very much. It is a real pleasure for me to be here and speak to you today. As the slide shows, we're looking at envisioning education for a sustainable future. And one of the main questions I have is, what role does education play in transitioning to a sustainable future? And as David Orr was initially going to come and give a keynote on education, I thought it appropriate to start with one of his quotes. And in 1992, David Orr summarized the environmental crisis first and foremost as a crisis of the mind, perception, and values. And hence, it's a challenge to those institutions that presume to shape minds, perceptions, and values. It is an educational challenge. But my question is, are our schools and our educational system up to this challenge, or even aware of the extent of the challenge in front of us? Given the magnitude of the change needed in our society, I wonder how we ever got to where we are. And given the systems that we have set up in society, there are definite implications that we're starting to realize. And how did we think? What are our patterns of thinking which set up this system in the first place? And I've come to the very strong conviction that how we educate seriously influences how we think. I was hit with an extreme example of this in Bhutan. As Alicia mentioned, I was working there for 2 years. I was working between 1988 and 1990. And it is still a rather remote country, and it has brought itself out of self-imposed isolation and brought in English as when it brought in an educational system. And it was really not unusual for me when I traveled to supervise trainee teachers in rather remote schools to see some of the other teachers who were in those schools using very, very traditional methods based on corporal punishment and memorization, not unlike our school system about 100 years ago. And as you would see these teachers teaching, they would wander around with a switch in their hand, supervising these students who are sitting on the floor cross-legged, memorizing and chanting their times tables or their spelling. And when I was back at the teacher training college, there is an elementary school attached to it as a demonstration school. And we were having discussion with some of those elementary students in grade 6. And interestingly, having a discussion about classroom management techniques. And we were asking them about how they felt about the kind of corporal punishment and whether they appreciated different classroom management techniques. And this one little girl was very, very confused by this question. And she put up her hand and she said, "But miss, they must beat us nicely or we wouldn't learn." And she was very serious. She really felt that. And so again, education tends to influence, how we educate tends to influence how we think. But we've come a long way from that, and I know in Bhutan they've come a long way as well. But education continues to influence in many ways which we don't always realize, very hidden ways. I've been involved in environmental and outdoor education since the 1970s, and the energy that has gone into both those areas of education has been astronomical. People have put their heart and soul into it. And teachers tend to be totally burnt out after maybe 10, 12 years of really trying to change the world through their educational approaches. And we haven't really made any measurable impacts in those systems. In the 30 years, we have been really working hard. And I have to ask, why aren't we making many inroads in education? And I've come to the conclusion that environmental and outdoor education really is not supported by the system that we have. If anything, it is subverted by the system. So after 20 years, I've come to realize that the system itself is our problem. It takes a while to realize that when you've succeeded in and you've chosen to dedicate your career to that very system. But I've come to realize it's not about changing and envisioning new futures, but it's really about maintaining the status quo. Remember, most educators who are working in the system are those like myself who succeeded in the system. We were good at school, and so we're not the best people to be critical of it. And I have to continually work very, very hard to break myself from the mindset that has helped instill in me. So let me clarify this mindset a little bit for you. If you don't, and see if you recognize some of the similarities with experiences you or your relatives have had with school. The dominant Western mindset is really based on mechanistic reductionist thinking. We've used this framework in how we've conceptualized learning and how we've organized learning. In dividing the self from the world, Descartes in the 17th century really separated the mind from the body, and personal meaning was identified primarily with the mind rather than with the body, mind, and the environment in relationship. His famous quote is, "I think, therefore I am." And this left us with the notion that analytical left brain was to be emphasized. The rational mind was separate from and superior to the bodily, the spiritual, the emotional, and the intuitive mind. So cognitive and analytical analysis was given emphasis over and higher status to the other right-brained intelligences that we also have. And deductive reasoning is emphasized. Also part of this dominant mindset is taking the world apart. We very much take the world apart to understand it. And Newton described the billiard ball universe, and he saw all the particles in the universe as separate entities, only having relation to one another as they collided. So they're independent particles. And we've used that thinking to really generate a concept that the environment is separate from the economy, which is very separate from society. And this mechanistic thinking of thinking things as separate is so pervasive. I'll tell you a little story of how pervasive it is. When, about a year ago, I injured my shoulder running, and I tripped over my dog and injured my shoulder. Went to my doctor, and he said, "Oh, no, I don't think I can do much for you, but you might want to go see an acupuncturist." A lot of people have found some good results. So I thought, oh, that was quite interesting of this doctor. So I went to the acupuncturist, and lo and behold, it really helped. And then I also turned 50 this spring, so I thought, that's it. I'm going to finally deal with this chronic back problem I've had, because every time I get running or skiing, my back problem starts to flare up, and it stops that activity. So I thought, that's it. I've had enough. I need a new body. I need to get my back in order. So I went off to a chiropractor who's a brilliant chiropractor who works with the systems of your body, and he looks at how your muscles are all integrated, and most back problems tend to happen, according to him, because your muscles are firing in the wrong order. And so he figures out which muscle's not firing when it needs to, and he helps you sort that out with exercises. So I'm getting my back all in order on a Thursday, and I went to see the acupuncturist, or I went to see her on the Monday, and first thing she said to me was, and when I told her I was also seeing a chiropractor now for my back, because I'd mentioned it to her when I saw her a year ago, she said, "Well, did you mention your shoulder to your chiropractor?" And I said, "Well, no, because I'm going to the chiropractor for my back, so I came to you for my shoulder." And I couldn't believe it. Here I was, being a person trying to help break people from mechanistic thinking and really encourage systems thinking, and I was even in the middle of preparing this keynote, and here I was thinking mechanistically again.